We are on this Sunday looking at the raid. We have practically not looked this up in basically 3 weeks. We have left up the Turbo Boost event to go on for players to get their 6+ item level increase, as well as their best in slot trinkets, most likely from the vendor of your puzzling cartel chips. Now, you might be wondering, but what's the point of checking how things are going in the raid if we are on like week 15 of the season, 3.5 months in? Clearly nobody cares anymore. There is like 1,200 guilds who have cleared this raid. Anyone else who is still progressing is in a very casual guild. It's not that they're gonna be re-rolling characters based on who is OP now. Well, as we already mentioned in this video right here, going through what it takes to be a mythic raider, this is also the best time of the season to be recruiting, to be applying to guilds, to be trialing to guilds, to start running not just one run on your mains, but also the runs on your alts in the raid. Start preparing, for example, alt characters to be ready for the next season, starting to think about what to play or what to try out in the raid. So this can also still be relevant for many players to check out how the trends of DPS performance is going right now in the raid, even if we are far gone from the very first few hectic weeks of progression. It is interesting that towards the top of the results we can find 3, we can call them genuine good performers, and then we have 3 frauds. So do not get baited by the results at first glance. This is what we have in 11.1.5 in terms of results. We can see a top 6, let's just say, top 6 formed by Devastation, Destruction, Marksmanship, Affliction, Survival, and Shadow Priest. A couple of these we haven't really seen before. We have gone through the raid results before, and we have pointed out, for example, how the best overall performer was Devastation Evoker. That was because pretty much on all of the bosses, overall, it was the most consistent performance. Like overall, it had the top damage on Galliwix, one of the top damages on Magzi, a few ads spawning every minute, still the top results. Back to pure single target on Lock and Stock, it was like the 6th best, back down to some ad spawns, 5th best. Rick Reverb, some burst AoE damage when he had spawn, best DPS. And then Cauldron, 6th best, and then Vexy burst windows every couple of minutes, best DPS. So overall, this has still remained the same. Devastation has remained the best overall DPS spec in the raid. Not by much. Yeah, we can praise the balancedness of the spec. It's not like in some previous tiers where you had a clear, very OP spec at the very top. Devastation is doing the best overall, but it's it's an okay, it's a healthy best at the moment. Where we have the frauds is later down, because out of this top 6, the 3 ones that shouldn't really be here, that aren't really as this rankings show for real, are Destruction, Affliction, and Shadow Priest. And the answer is simple. We have just seen a snippet of it with the damage of Cauldron. There you have them over here. At this point, even you, perhaps not in Pugs. I'm not sure if Pugs do this already, but certainly if you are in a guild yourself, you have seen these 3 clowns plant themselves in the middle of the room, taking both of the debuffs of the 2 bosses to just cleave them, to target DPS, both of them, because they have the tools to hit them both at the same time. Shadow Priest with dots, and then the apparitions going to both bosses, Affliction with dots again, and then Destruction with their Havoc and duplicating the damage. So they can take advantage from that in Cauldron. You have the other boss, which facilitates the playstyle of these 3 specs, which is Bandit, right? Again, 3 at the top, only beaten by what we mentioned being Devastation. They do pretty much the same thing. The mobs on Bandit spawn every minute, so it's pretty easy to guess what's gonna happen on a damage pattern, for example, of the Affliction Warlock every minute. Well, every minute, this is what's gonna happen. They're gonna line up all of their CDs, because they are, luckily, on a 1-minute window of CDs, pretty much all of them, besides their Summon Darkler, which is every other minute. But besides the Darkler, they can just line up their Singularity, their Malevolence, their Soul Rot every minute with the ads spawning. So it's a very nice fight for them. Same goes for Shadow and same goes for Destruction. that is pretty much what has kept them overall to be this high. Because when you go down to Gallywix, the last boss, you have the 2 Warlocks and even the Priest towards the middle or towards the bottom of the results. You go to Magzi, another very important fight, this time Priest is in the middle, and you also have the 2 Warlocks doing very well. Now, prior to this, it was even more lopsided in the favor of destruction. Now, luckily, with guilds, killing Magzi faster, skipping phases or shortening the phases on Magzi is not nearly as visible. But basically, what happens in this fight is that many guilds are going to be ignoring the ads, the little copters that spawn, because they know that the Warlocks can deal with it, especially the Distraction Warlock. When you look at the damage done to enemies and you look at the Electroshocker, you will find something like this. The Warlock and the multi-dotters will just deal with it, and the rest of the group will just keep damaging Magzi. Because that copter can spawn like 30 or 40 yards away, there is no point for the melees or for the single target casters to just directly target that copter, who is more or less harmless. So you just let the casters that can better deal with them, in this case most of the time it's going to be a Destro Warlock or an Affliction Warlock, which is what also gives them good results. However, not for the damage that matters. Sprocket, which is pure single target, you have all of them at the bottom. Styx does have a bunch of ads, but the ads are a bit too spread and die a bit too fast for them to do any decent, so they are middle of the pack again. Rick Reverb, you do have the ads spawning. Burst AoE damage is something Affliction can do, not the other 2 specs nearly as well. And then again, Vexy, 2-minute timer of burst single target damage, also not something they do great at the moment. So you do have these 3 specs show up overall as being some of the best ones, but not really because they are consistent, not really because they have a great damage profile for all fights, like for example Devastation, but because they excel at a few fights here and there, in particular, as we mentioned, One-Armed Bandit, Cauldron, and a couple of them also on Magzi, on a type of damage you don't really care about too much, which is the ads that spawn in the fight. So it's not a 100% true and real result what you see in here. It's a bit mystified by these 2 to 3 boss fights where they do quite well. Where you have the more consistent results overall in this top 6 after Devastation are the other 2 shades of green, the Marksmanship and the Survival Hunter. So these specs, on the other hand, are consistent with their damage. We just saw Gallywix, you had Marksmanship being 3rd, with Survival quite a bit lower behind. On Magzi, you have Marksmanship being 2nd and Survival being 5th. One-Armed Bandit is one of the weaker ones for both. Marksmanship can hit multiple ones a bit better than Survival, but is still reasonably weak compared to their overall. Back to pure single target of Sprocket, 1st and 2nd in terms of damage. Back to Styx, another type of fight where they're not doing too well in the damage profile. Rick Reverb, Marksmanship is 2nd. Cauldron, Marksmanship is 5th, and then 2-minute burst windows, Marksmanship is 2nd again. With Survival also doing well, although not nearly as well as Marksmanship. This is the other 2nd, pretty much best performing spec overall. After Devastation, the one who performs the best across different boss fights would have to be Marksmanship. Across all of the other you see getting reasonably high, like Assassination, like Frost Decay, like Windwalker, and even Ret or Fury Warrior or Unholy. Basically this entire clump of melee DPS right here. The one that has the more overall consistent results is going to be Survival. The one even above them though is Marksmanship. So Marksmanship has received a series of buffs over time, mostly we're talking about Dark Ranger, which was a while ago terrible and unusable. It has been fully reworked as well. Now it has gotten significantly stronger in turning your Black Arrow into your kill shot, while still of course benefiting from all of the buffs that you can get from kill shot, in particular Death Blow. So the ability to still cast kill shot even if the enemy is not in execute range or at close to max HP, above 80% HP. Not only that, but you can also still benefit from precise shots with Black Arrow, just like you could with kill shots. You still benefit from Razor Fragments, like you could from kill shot, as well as the further extra chance to reset your arrow with your auto attacks. The result is that you have a very powerful, amongst the more powerful 2-minute windows as a spec. Here is another spec that is known for having these powerful 2-minute windows like Unholy. And you can see the difference here that Marksmanship can, for example, peak at 10 million, get past 7.5 million, close to 10 million, or just straight up past 10 million, especially once you get into execute phase, or above 80% HP when you are more free to cast your Dark Arrow, and then you compare it with Unholy DK on the same fight, and they are barely struggling to get past 7.5 million in their burst windows. So Marksmanship can excel at doing this, especially in this phases, as mentioned, either at max HP or in execute phase, where your cast time of Black Arrows are significantly increased. You know, once your true shot goes away, you can see the cast of Black Arrow kind of disappear. They become far less frequent. Unless you proc your death blow, you have no way of actually using it, and then once you get close to your true shot again is when you get your burst of damage up thanks to Black Arrow. This is what is gonna be pretty much consistent on all damage profiles, all damage styles, which has allowed Marksmanship to do so well. Yes, in case you're interested about the spec, we are still talking about Marksmanship Hunter, so we're still talking about 4 buttons on a good day. You know, it's not particularly complex as a spec. However, if it does look too daunting for you even to be pressing 4 to 5 buttons as a Marksmanship Hunter, don't worry. You can actually go even lower and instead play Survival. Survival, not playing Dark Ranger, not because it's weak, because Survival doesn't have Dark Ranger as an option. They play Pack Leader, and instead of playing the very powerful 2-minute windows of Marksmanship, they do play 1-minute windows on Coordinated Assault and Spearhead, both talented to reduce the cooldown down to 1 minute. So the result is quite, you know, self-explanatory. A lot of their damage will happen in 1 minute windows. And yes, as mentioned, in terms of complexity, it is, you know, even simpler. You are practically clicking 3 buttons, and practically whenever they are up and available, without too much thought behind it. You have the same, as mentioned, lining up of cooldowns, since they are all on the same level. You have Spearhead on 1 minute, Assault on 1 minute, Flanking Strike every 30 seconds, so it's easier to line up, and then House of Cards has a 90-second cooldown, so you will be alternating them every other 1 minute of your cooldowns lining up. So it is very simple, and it is performing very well. Of course, it's a melee spec, so it does suffer from the ability or the inability to multi-target or cleave and hit far away enemies or spread enemies. So on fights like One-Armed Bandit or Sticks, you know, it's much harder for a Survival to be doing good damage because the mobs are coming from all over the place. It's not that easy to hit them. Same goes for a One-Armed Bandit. Pretty much same reasoning. They have an easier time, not that they are the best, but they have an easier time if the mobs are stacked together. At least you can AoE them down close to each other, like in the mobs spawning on Rick Reverb. But it has allowed them over time to have a pretty good result as well. Pack Leader was also pretty much reworked and buffed multiple times. So towards the top we have basically now a meta of green. The 2 Hunter greens and the Devastation green are doing very well. With then the 2 Warlock specs, Destruction and Affliction, with the Shadow Priest having more, you know, niche conditional type of good results depending on the damage profile, which in this case it would be Maxi, One-Armed Bandit, Cauldron, even Rick. Basically, if there are enough adds that stay alive for long enough, even better if they are spread, so other specs like melees can take advantage of them, but only they can, it's gonna be better. But in terms of overall consistent results, especially what players look forward to the most in terms of power of the spec, which is single target, just how much damage you can do to a boss in a raid, then yes, they are definitely on the weak end of the results. Now, one thing that is worth pointing out though, after we have glazed at least half of this top 6 and then kind of threw shade on the other half of this top 6, is the fact that many of these specs are very, very similar right now in terms of results. Once you exclude the one-offs, you know, the peculiar type of damage profiles where you can see a larger gap from bottom to top, like for example One-Armed Bandit, or, you know, the pseudo cheeses like Cauldron with the things that Warlocks can pull off in the fight. When you go and look towards more comprehensive damage profiles, like for example Gallywix, who is like a lot of single target and then some like 5 adds spawning and then way more adds spawning and then back to single target, you know, they just cycled through all of this evenness of damage profile, you can see that these specs towards the top right here are averaging between 3.28 and 3.2 basically million DPS on average, and the ones towards the bottom are basically on the very high 2.9 million or very low 3 million. So we're talking about, from top to bottom, something in the range of 7-ish% damage gap from top to bottom on basically the more important or the biggest fight in the tier. Even, you know, below them on Maxi, the number would be similar. It's like 2.9 at the very top, and then at the very bottom is 2.6, which is about 10% gap, which is you know, reasonably healthy in terms of the gap between the top and the bottom. You know, to the level where it doesn't feel too awful to try to play specs that are not doing too well towards the bottom. Even now, for example, if you look at the popularity, some of the more popular specs are Balanced Druid as well as Beast Mastery Hunter. This is Balanced Druid, this is Beast Mastery Hunter. Even slightly lower down, but still towards the top, like what, top 15 of the most played specs. So in the top half of the more played spec, you have Elemental, you have Frost Mage. This is Frost Mage, this is Elemental. So even towards the lower, you know, the lower side of results, you do have performing spec. Even, for example, a pure single target fight like Sprocket with the terrible results of Balance, you know, Balance can still sort of carry its own on this kind of fight. Same with another spec we mentioned for being very poor, like Elemental, or like BM Hunter, or like Feral Druid, another spec that is currently towards the bottom of the results overall. So even changing fights. Now we are on Galliwix, another one of the bottom specs. Elemental and Enhancement are now towards the top on Galli. Same goes for Balance and same goes for Frost. They are all over here right now in terms of overall results. You go back to Maxi, and that's when you see them being much lower down. All four of them, right over here. So it is still nice to see that specs not currently doing too well, or not currently overall doing well, still have multiple fights throughout the tier where they can still perform okay or be competitive to some degree. Even the later bosses, yes, they will still be likely the ones slated for some buffs, you know, especially if we go towards next season. Now that this patch 11.1.7 will go live in a couple of days, that's when we will enter DPTR for season 3. We will start seeing the news on, for example, the new tier sets for the new season, as well as the balance tuning planned for the new season. So this is where you can start looking towards some of these specs lower down for some buffs. Even though, as mentioned, the gap from top to bottom is not huge right now, especially the gap between different damage profiles is not even that huge. Some specs can still be decent in certain type of damage profiles, like pure single target, and much weaker when it comes to AoE damage. So the results won't even be nearly as bad as the overall damage you get to see on a daily basis on Warcraft logs, for example. But that's our, so far at least, expectations given the result in the raid so far. We are at this point deep into the season. We are already reached pretty much our max power level, so not much to change at this point. We have gotten our max 683 item level, our best in slot. If you got them 2 different trinkets from your vendor, you have gotten your helmet enchant. All that's left now is another 2% damage increase from the belt coming out tomorrow, and that's about it. No more power increases, no more power-ups until the rest of the season. So not much else left to change in terms of these results. So that is what we have in terms of the raid situation so far in Season 2. We have looked at the top 6 with the 3 original good performers and then the 3 frauds, the 3 impostors being at the top, not really because they are top in the raid at pretty much most fights, but because they excel at a handful of them. So with this explained now on this Sunday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, it's that time of the day again. We are at like 34 degrees while it's cloudy, so wet, damp, humid air, which makes it feel 10 degrees hotter. Great.